And we're back to Radio Free Market with our guest, Dr. Robert Murphy. And we were just talking about where the dollar's headed in terms of the world and the world reserve currency, and how the Fed generally is only controlled by economy-wide inflation, how this crisis has really pushed its limits. So I know that Austrian economists have predicted the collapse of the dollar before, and they have certainly in this crisis. Do you think the Fed would stop before this point, or do you think they even can?
Well, that's a great question. It's hard to say because we don't really know what the intentions are of Ben Bernanke and the other people who are calling the shots. And what I mean by that is, of course, Austrian economists don't endorse what Bernanke has done since this crisis really kicked in. But the ironic thing is, even guys like Paul Krugman don't endorse what he's done either, right? So you have all these different schools of thought, and there's no one school that would like what he's done. And what I mean, just to be more specific, is if you look at Bernanke's academic work and this public statements he's making, you would think then, okay, what we need to do is you need to get more money into the hands of the actual public, like have things like M1 and M2 go up really high. But that's not what the Fed has done. So he bailed out all the big bankers, but then he also started paying interest on reserves that the banks kept on deposit with the Fed. So just intuitively, what that means is Bernanke was paying bankers not to make loans to the public. Mm-hmm. And so that just doesn't make any sense according to his official rationale. So to answer your question, yeah, there is plenty of time to turn it around and rescue the dollar and so forth. But since I don't really know what their intentions are, I don't know. I'm not going to say that's what's going to happen because what he's doing doesn't make any sense, and so it's hard to figure out what his true motives are.
Right. At the same time, he's testifying that the banks have plenty of liquid assets, and they're really trying to get him to loan. He's paying them to keep them from loaning. So I guess you can't really guess at what the human element would be when it's all left up to like 12 people or however many in the Board of Governors.
Right, that's exactly right, that it's really hard to predict because you can't look at his public statements and try to extrapolate and see what he's going to do in the future because what he's said doesn't mesh with what he's actually been doing, and so it's really hard to say what his motivations are.
Is there anything that the government has done historically, or any government has done historically, to keep the dollar functioning, keep their currency functioning in the face of inflation, whether it be to politically maneuver them to stay as the world reserve currency or just to keep it going inside this country?
Well, sure. I think a great example would be the U.S. in the late 1970s, where we were having double-digit price inflation, and then Paul Volcker comes in as the new Fed chief, and he jacked up interest rates to, what to our mind now sounds shocking, 20+%, mm-hmm. And that really did stamp out there was a very painful recessions in the early 80s, back-to-back recessions, but that did sort of kill off the inflation genie, put it back in the bottle, if you will. And then because the problem with inflation is it feeds on itself. Once the public starts expecting that prices are going to keep rising at double-digit rates, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because then people go and they want to spend their money to get rid of it before its value gets eroded. But that very action of them going and spending their money is what pushes up prices. So yes, if people are really tough, once inflation starts getting out of hand, they can slam on the brakes, and the U.S. did do that in the late 1970s and early 80s, and got price inflation under control. My concern is this time around, if and when all this new money Bernanke has created that's sort of bottled up in the banking system right now, if that ever starts flowing out, the only way he's going to be able to nip that in the bud is to absolutely devastate the financial sector, to basically undo all of the rescues that he did so far. And just, it seems like their priority is, number one, save the banks and let the rest of the country, let the chips fall where they may. So I can't see any scenario where Bernanke sacrifices the banks in order to preserve, the middle class or the dollar.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Robert Murphy, for being with us today and explaining all this dollar and Fed stuff. This is Zoe Russell in Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can download this and all of our shows for free. And until next week, wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening.